Welcome to another episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, small chain of independent record stores in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local, you can shop online at ntxvinyl.com. And I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed on YouTube or followed us on Facebook and Instagram. Today's topic, my personal vinyl wish list. 10 records I wish I owned. I don't. Most of the time I'm talking about records that are coming from this shelf or from my room that I've actually heard before or can actually spin. But in this case, I've never owned any of these on vinyl. I've heard them, obviously, being able to stream them or maybe had a copy on CD back in the day. But it's stuff that, again, it's been on my wish list for, in some cases, many, many years. And so it was very easy for me to go through that list, even though it's exhaustive and very long, to pinpoint ones that they've been there for a long time. And I would say the vast majority of these are albums that, man, I'm really kicking myself. I wish I would have bought it a couple years ago or even when it came out a long time ago. But you can't buy them all. These are definitely ones that I put high up on my list of regret that I didn't pick them up because they've all gone up in value a ton. And in most cases, not only have gone up in value that make them hard to acquire, but a lot of times in a lot of cases, they're just rare and you can't find them. Literally, you don't ever see them for sale, and you especially don't see them for sale in the United States, which makes it harder to take a chance to spend a bunch of money on a record that you're having shipped across the world, right? The way I curated this quick list is I went through my Discogs wish list, which is a great feature, a great tool. If you don't use it, I've actually got a video, I think, that I'll queue up at the end of this one. You can check out if you need some tips on how to use the wish list, but it's a very simple tool. So first on the list in my top 10 that I wish I owned is Outside by David Bowie. This is a record that came out in 1995 at the peak of alternative rock in the mainstream. Bowie was in typical Bowie fashion being incredibly creative and thinking outside the box, if you will. I saw him on this tour when Nine Inch Nails partnered with him, which was incredibly impactful and to me just an eye-opener. I knew David Bowie at the time, of course, knew the hit songs from back in the 70s, but I had never seen David Bowie like this. And so to this day, Outside is an album that I've always wanted to own on vinyl. Again, it came out originally in 1995. There have been a couple reissues, but they're mostly limited edition, very hard to find. The one in particular that I have on my wish list is actually a 2015 reissue on white vinyl. It's going for over $150, just really hard to grab. And again, like I was saying, you just don't see it a lot of times in the United States, which is a lot of the issues with, a lot of these records on here, you just don't see them. So David Bowie, Outside, an incredible record. Again, really experimental. And I think for me, he was taking a lot of cues from Trent Reznor, in regards to his kind of use of more, electronic music. And again, he really, really positioned this album to fit with the era. Come out in 95. You wouldn't have known David Bowie started recording music in the 60s if you heard this record in 1995, which is a testament to his talent and how successfully he was able to morph his style, which is just incredible. And I think this is one of those albums that really showcases that. So I love Outside, and one day I'd love to add it to my collection. So that's high on my wish list. The second one on my wish list, this one came out in 1993, just prior. So again, another early 90s record. There's quite a handful of these on the list. Too High to Die by the Meat Puppets. This is a cool record. The Meat Puppets are one of those bands that never really got their day in the spotlight, I don't think. The one kind of, if you could call it a big single they had, was on this album. It was a song called Backwater, which is a phenomenal song and did see plenty of airplay. But of course, in 1993, it was a competitive market on radio. You're competing with all the heavy hitters and alternative rock and the Seattle scene. And so, they definitely had more exposure on this record and during this period of time. And Kurt Cobain famously brought him out for the Nirvana Unplugged sessions to play a few songs. In fact, Lake of Fire is on this record. So this is one, again, that I've just always had on my list. There's several different versions of this. I think there's a 10-inch version, and it goes for, again, around $100 or so. But it's the same issue. You just don't see them for sale very often. So it's less with most of these, it's less about the monetary costs and more about just finding one in good condition from a seller you trust that's actually in the United States, which is the struggle with so many of these. But I think this one's highly underrated. I love this Meat Puppets record. They've had a pretty extensive discography and extensive career, but this is the one I think that kind of bubbled up. And at that time, they really did gain some exposure, some well-deserved exposure. But overall, the band very underrated and I think underexposed as far as their career is concerned, and I think just got overlooked because they were in that time period where there were so many great alternative albums coming out. So, Too High to Die from from '93, definitely on my list that I'd love to add to this shelf right here. Another one from '93, completely different. I don't know if a completely different genre, but definitely a completely different artist. And this is, if I had to name one Neil Young record that I don't have in my collection, which there are plenty, Neil Young's MTV Unplugged would be on that list, and it's high on this list as well. Just an incredible performance. Very hard to find on vinyl. I don't even know if it was released in the US on vinyl. I don't think it was. The Harvest Moon album had just come out the year prior, and so a lot of Neil Young on MTV Unplugged was based on that record. He played some hits as well, going all the way back to early days, Mr. Soul, and he played like a Hurricane and Helpless. So there's some great stuff in there as far as his catalog is concerned. But when you look at songs like Unknown Legend and From Hank to Hendrix, there's some great takes of those Harvest Moon tracks. And there's some good stories around this Unplugged too, as far as Neil not being happy with the first day they recorded it, and he came back and brought the whole audience back and recut it again live, typical Neil fashion. But this is one, again, I don't think I've ever seen a copy for sale locally. Like, I've never actually held one and touched one, otherwise I probably would have bought it. But it goes for, $100 or $200 plus easily, especially if you find one in the United States. So Neil Young Unplugged, another one that I'd love to add to the shelf, especially given how big of a Neil Young fan I am and how much of his discography I have. So that's a big one. Next on the list, 2007, the soundtrack to the film Once. This is kind of an outlier to me because I'm not a huge soundtrack guy. But in recent years, I've really become a fan of Glenn Hansard. And I've known this album and this movie since it came out. I saw it somewhere around the time it came out, and I had an appreciation for it, but not until recent years when I've really dove into Glenn's catalog, and seeing him live is an amazing experience. I had the chance to do that, and so it's really changed my perception of Glenn just because I wasn't that familiar with him. And so this is one in his catalog where he still performs songs from this to this day because it's such a kind of a well-known album, even though it is a soundtrack, and he was in the movie, and it was very wrapped up as far as the movie is concerned. But the soundtrack itself stands alone with some incredible music. It's a very delicate album, and one that I would just love to hear on vinyl. And it's one that's been on my list for several years. And it's inching up there from a prioritization standpoint. That's kind of how I roll. Like, some albums will be on my list for years, but then every now and then I'll get into an artist, like I had recently with Glenn. So now this one's gone way up in recent years, just because I've become more a fan of him and I want to collect the whole discography. So the Once soundtrack, again, came out in 2007. Definitely on my list. There's a couple different pressings of this one, but they are all hard to find. Definitely could use a reissue. I don't know if that'll happen or if that'll happen, but it would be great. But if you can grab a copy of the Once soundtrack for $100 or less, you're doing great, because they're pretty hard to come by, and again, pretty hard to find in the States to some extent. So number 5 on my list. This is probably one of the more obscure ones on the list. There's an album that came out in 2009. The band was called Monsters of Folk. They were technically a supergroup because you got Jim James from My Morning Jacket, you got Connor and Mike from Bright Eyes, M. Ward from She and Him, and also Will Johnson from Centromatic, I think, helped out just on the tour. I'm not sure if he was actually on the record, but he was very much involved in the project. Monsters of Folk came out in 2009. Very hard album to find. Sells for $100 or $200. You never see it available. I think there was only 1 or 2 pressings of it. Just a really great album. If you're a My Morning Jacket fan or Bright Eyes fan or any of those artists that I mentioned, man, there's some killer songs on this album. It is really well done. I don't know if they'll ever get back together and do it again. It kind of feels like a one-off type of situation. But look into it, Monsters of Folk, if you've never heard it. Again, if you're a fan of those types of artists, you know, Bright Eyes and My Morning Jacket and Centromatic, you will love this album. The songs are incredible. You can tell it was a really collaborative effort. They switch around on vocals a whole bunch, so everyone's kind of involved from a songwriting and performing standpoint. And it's another one that I've just never seen on vinyl. And I explicitly remember passing on this one because it was just one of those kind of oddball records where it's like at the time it came out, you like didn't really know what it was, but it's really grown on me over the years. And again, has kind of inched up on that list where every time I'm looking through that want list or where I get the email that Discogs sends me every night and I scroll through there, if I see a copy available, I'm always clicking on it, and just it's so rare to find one that's available at a decent price and that's you know, from a seller I trust and all that stuff. So check out Monsters of Folk. Again, one of the more obscure ones on my wish list that I hope to own one day. Number 6, Liquor in the Front, Poker in the Rear. The Reverend Horton Heat's 1994 album. If you're not familiar with the Rev, based here in Dallas, became really popular in the early 90s, still has you know, active career to this day. You know, psychobilly, rockabilly. I saw the band locally a number of times in clubs, but the time I remember seeing the most was in 1994 on tour for this album, opening for Soundgarden during the Super Unknown tour here in Dallas, which was an incredible experience. It was a weird pairing to have the Rev with Soundgarden, but you can look it up to this day. I believe on YouTube, or maybe it was just an article of hearing the Rev talk about the experience of getting to go on that tour with Soundgarden and what it did for their career. Gave them a ton of exposure outside of the rockabilly kind of genre, which they're very much in, but they got to expand their horizons during that tour, play in big venues in front of a rock crowd, and I think gave them, not that they needed credibility, but it gave them credibility with outside of their kind of niche genre, which is great. It's a super fun album. 5-0 Ford, Cruising for a Bruisin', Liquor, Beer, and Wine. I mean, it's just One Time for Me, I think was the single off this. Great record. Never seen it on vinyl in person. In fact, when I'm looking right here, I don't even think there's any copies available on Discogs. You can't even buy it now if you wanted to. I rarely see it. So it's one I'm always looking for, especially being from Dallas and always trying to collect records from local artists that I love. And it's just hard to come by some of them. So the Rev's on that list and one I'm constantly keeping an eye out for. The next one on the list is actually a 12-inch single. It's not a full length, and that is Them Bones by Alice in Chains. This is a 12-inch single, came out in 93, was only a UK release. Obviously, the title track, Them Bones, the single off Dirt, opening song, also features We Die Young, Got Me Wrong, and Am I Inside. So it's a little bit of a compilation single, if you will, because those songs cross all of, you know, several of their records, which is cool. It comes in a die-cut sleeve, and it comes only on blue vinyl. And for me, those early to mid 90s 12-inch singles from these types of bands, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, you know, Nirvana, those bands that really cemented, you know, alternative rock, they're really collectible and just really cool to me, and I love to have them in the discography. So this single from Alice in Chains has always been on my list. Another one I've never seen in the flesh, and I'm always checking to try and find one. They're readily available here and there, but again, never in the States. And so it's just about me getting the confidence up to find a seller I trust over in the UK. And then especially hard with a single because you're going to drop, I don't know, this will sell for 30, 40, 50, $40 or $50 if you can find one in good condition. But again, then you got to take the chance on a single to spend that much money and get it shipped all the way across the country. I just haven't done it yet, but it's on the list. One day it'll be up here with the rest of my Alice in Chains collection. Number 8, we've only got a couple more. The album is called Nice, and it is from Henry Rollins and Rollins Band. It was their last record. As you can see, it's got an incredible cover. And honestly, it's got some incredible songs on it. It is a really different album if you're familiar with Rollins Band. He has a completely different backing band. It was a backing band called Mother Superior, which is kind of like a you know, rock, psychedelic blues band, some funk influence. And that's what gives the album a different vibe completely. I have in recent years become a huge Henry Rollins fan. I've always been a fan of the band, Rollins Band, Black Flag, and known the history, but in recent years have started to follow him more and more and really get engaged with who he is and how he works, and is a fascinating individual. So this album for me is always has been on the list for several years, and again, it's getting prioritized, but it is super hard to find, several $100s. I don't think it was ever released on vinyl in the US at all. Even the CD is hard to find. I don't think you can stream it. I think you can look it up on YouTube. It's the only place you can even find the audio to actually hear this thing, but I encourage that because it is a really cool sounding album. And I think in their catalog, it's just really unique. Not only was it their last record, but it just has a really unique vibe because of the difference in musicianship. So if you're not familiar with Nice by Rollins Band, check it out. One day I hope to own it on vinyl. Not very confident that will happen unless there's a reissue, but it doesn't seem likely. So, all right, number 9. This is a really unique one, and it is the Sonic Evolution album, technically by Mad Season, kind of. This came out in 2015. It was a live performance that took place, I believe, at Benaroya Hall in Seattle. It featured Chris Cornell sitting in for Lane Staley on vocals for Mad Season. It also featured Matt Cameron on drums. Or I'm sorry, I think Matt Cameron sat in some on drums. I know Duff from GNR came and sat in on this and played a lot. So it's kind of this all-star live show of these musicians playing not only the Mad Season album, the majority of tracks from that album, but also some of the Temple of the Dog album. So it's just a really unique kind of captured moment, if you will, in a live setting. It's super rare. There was a version that was put out by Pearl Jam's 10 Club on color vinyl that's many hundreds of dollars, unfortunately. And even the normal black vinyl version that came out, I think, around the same time is pretty hard to find. So I need this one. I really do. I own everything by all of those bands mentioned, and this is just one of those holes in the catalog for me. So I'm always on the lookout for this and just trying to find it at a price that won't really gouge the bank account. But it's, again, getting harder and harder these days. This is one where I don't ever see this getting reissued. It was kind of a one-off performance, obviously kind of an amalgamation of several different bands, and very much a tribute to the Mad Season project. And it was just cool to hear Chris Cornell sing and put his take on a lot of these songs. It was really cool. So check out Sonic Evolution if you've never heard it. It's a really cool version of some classic songs from, again, that early 90s period. So last on the list, maybe most obvious, I don't know, maybe not, Einema by Tool. This is one of those ones. In fact, it's the only one on the list. The only one on the list that I do own in some form, because I do have the unofficial bootleg copies, which, if you are like me and you're not lucky enough to own an original copy from 1996, then that's the best it'll do, and they're fine. But man, just for me, Tool is such an important band for my taste and for my collection. One day, I really do hope to own an original copy of Einema. I saw that was the first tour that I saw the band on. I think I saw them 4 or 5 times on the Einema tour, because they toured on it for several years, and they came through Texas, I think 2-3 times on the Einema tour. It was my initial exposure to them from a live perspective. I've seen them pretty much every tour since then that they've come through the Dallas area, at least. And again, it's just that big hole in the collection. So few of Tool's albums are pressed to vinyl in period. So it's like you don't have 10,000 Days, you don't have Fear Inoculum, you don't have Saliva as far as official pressings on vinyl. So you really had Opiate at the very beginning, and then you had Undertone, you had Einema, and there's nothing else on vinyl officially. So I would love to complete the collection with Einema, but it's a pricey proposition. If you can find one in great shape for less than $1,000, you're doing good, and that's insane to think about. I don't know if I could ever spend that much money on a singular item, a singular LP. If I was, this would probably be the album I'd drop it on, but it would have to be an incredible copy. And it would have to be something where I could probably hold it in my hands and touch it and spin it before I would drop that. That's the other thing about spending that much money on a record. if you're buying it online, you don't even get a chance to play test it. You can't see it. You can't actually, put it in the light and make sure you're getting your money's worth, which is hard when you're spending that much money. So this has been on the wish list since the late 90s probably, and I remember not pulling the trigger on it then because it was a little pricey. But what are you going to do? If that's the biggest regret I have in life is not buying a few records, and I think I'm doing pretty good. So that's my wish list, my top 10. There's hundreds on my wish list. Again, if you don't use the Discogs wish list feature, I highly recommend it. Even if you don't catalog your albums there, you can still use the wish list. A lot of people just keep a note on their phone or a scrap piece of paper or something. Whatever serves you best, but I highly recommend keeping a wish list, and it's cool on Discogs because it'll notify you when something becomes available. And if it's stuff like I'm after, which is pretty rare stuff that you don't see that often, that's really important because when something pops up for sale, you get notified and you can actually go grab it if it's a good price right then. So super useful tool that I look at every day as a record collector. So highly recommend that. Love to hear what's on your wish list. Tell me your top couple, your top 10. I'd love to see. I'm sure it'll be some diverse list. There's a lot of amazing albums out there, especially when you get into rarities and stuff. But even stuff for new collectors who just have a wish list of catalog titles that they're hoping to peck off. I'd love to hear what's on your list. So let me know in the comments. Appreciate you watching. As always, I'll pop up some more videos right here for you to check out. So subscribe to the channel. Watch some more of our stuff, and we'll keep pumping out these videos. Really appreciate all the support and the encouragement and all of the positive feedback. Thanks again. My name's G.I. Sanders. This has been Talking About Records.